Hi everyone and welcome back to this week's Draw With Me. So this week I'm going to show you how I go about drawing mandala, and specifically when I use a protractor to find my angles. So all you're going to need for this one is almost pretty much what you can see in the video. So I've got a piece of paper, I've got a pencil, I've got a protractor, I've got a rubber, I've got a compass, I've got my ruler. And what you can't see for the end is I've also got a black fine liner. So just before I started recording, I drew a line down the middle of my page, and roughly in the middle of that, it doesn't have to be exact, I did an intersecting mark, and that is the point where I have put my circular protractor. What you can see me doing here is I'm going around my protractor and I am marking every 10 degrees for the whole 360 degrees. If you don't have a full circular protractor like this, don't worry. What you can do is, because you've already drawn your straight line and your intersecting bit, match just your normal protractor down that straight line on one side with the 90 degrees on the intersection and do all your 10 degrees, and then do the same again on the other side. And then you'll still end up with a full circle of dots, just without having to use or buy one of these. So all I'm going to do next is I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to join up all of those dots. So I've got lines going all the way around my page. So initially I only did dot to dot, and then I very quickly realized after a few lines that I needed to make them longer, because otherwise the mandala is only going to end up really small and I'd have to extend them. So I did go back in and do that, and I'm going to apologize for this beginning bit of the video where you keep seeing the top of my head. It is quite hard to see these little dots sometimes when you've drawn them on the page, so I was having to lean in a little bit to try and get a better look to line up. And no, it's not the easiest to see when my head is in the way, but the way I do this is I will put my pencil onto one of the dots and I line the ruler up to it. I then try, with my pencil still on the original dot, try and line the bottom of the ruler up roughly with the center point in the middle, and then the other dot, and then I will move my pencil down to the other dot to then check that it is in line before I draw my straight line across. So you can sort of see me doing it in this video where I will put the ruler in, line the first dot, check it, adjust it. I've just moved my hand down to adjust to the second dot and then draw my line across. Again, I will apologize for the fact my head is getting away just a little bit in this beginning part of the video. top of the lime's gone in. It is now all there, so each intersecting point has been joined. And now I've done all that, it's time to start using the compass. So for this mandala, I am going to do the seed of life in the middle. So if you're unsure what that is, it's a circle with other intersecting circles to make, it's like almost like a flower leaf pattern. So I've set my compass to my size, and all I'm going to do is put it on that central intersecting point and draw a circle in the middle of my lines. Once I've done that, so I'm not going to adjust my compass, I've then moved it to the outer edge of the circle at the top. So I've put it at the top on my dissecting line just to make it easier for my first one, and drawn another circle. And then all you're going to do is you're going to go round the circle, drawing 5 more in total. So you end up with 6 around that initial circle. And to find the next point where you put your point of your compass, just look for where the previous circle you've drawn intersects with the very original circle in the middle. And eventually you'll end up back where you started, and you'll have a nice little pattern. Once I did my 6 original whole circles, I've then found the point where the intersecting circles, it looks a little bit like a triangle, and I'm putting my point on the top of that, and then I'm just drawing a semicircle in the middle of each one. So I'm not going outside the current circle. So what that's doing is where I've ended up with empty space, I'm just following on and continuing to create the pattern that we originally created, but I don't want it to expand any bigger out the middle of my mandala. So that's why I am just drawing the semicircles. Once that's complete and I've got all my extra little semicircles joined in, I've put my compass back in the middle and I've measured the point out so it touches just on the edge of the circles as they go round, and I've just encircled it with one big circle, and then I've adjusted my compass slightly further out and I've drawn a second circle round. This is just a nice way to frame that central bit and then move on with a nice sort of, not flat as it's a circle, but a nice smooth base to do the next bit. So to form the petals, what I do normally is I will draw the first part of a petal just on one side, and then that allows me to see where each bit goes. So you can see I initially drew up to started at the base, drew up to one line, and then drew up higher. And then I stop with the compass because what I'm doing is I am then measuring out where the line I've drawn crosses those lines that we drew originally. So I am drawing 2 more circles, one to the top of the petal and one halfway down where it crosses the line, just so I can make all of them that go round this circle the same height and the same size. So where the curve is, it should be in almost the same place on every petal as we go round. So once I've drawn those 2 circles, I'm now going to go round, as you can see, drawing those petals in the entire way around that circle. So I will normally not try and do it in one swoop. I will do it so that I end up going from the base to the first inner circle that we've just drawn with the first bit of the curve, and then I will go from that line up to the top of the curve. And as you can see, like here, sometimes I'll do both bottom bits and then I'll go up and do both top bits. It doesn't really matter which way around you do it, which way around the circle, whether you do all the bottoms first and then add the tops in, as long as it's in a way that you're comfortable with and you keep to the lines that you've drawn as guides, you will then end up with something as symmetrical as it can be when it's hand drawn without either tracing or using a computer program to make it fully symmetrical. I've got to the end of drawing those petals all the way around. I'm now going to start my next set of petals going between those petals and higher. So I think about what shape I want, and again I'll sort of roughly sketch one side, working out how big I want it and what shape I'm looking to create, before I then again use my compass in the middle, and I'm going to draw that outer line so I know how far out each petal will need to go for this round. And now I've got my circle, I then continue with fixing the other side and then drawing these shapes all the way around the rest of the mandala. So with mandalas, it is just a case of repeating what we've done for the last 2 rounds over and over again with different shapes and different sizes to end up with a different pattern. So much like the round we've just completed, I'm doing almost the same again, but I am now putting it above the first round of petals that we drew. So this one is a similar shape to the second row that we've just completed, but it's starting off the top of the first row, and this one is bigger again. So like before, this time I've just drawn both sides of the petal before I've used the compass to then mark out what the outer edge is going to be for each one before going round and drawing all of those in to keep the symmetry going. With that round complete, I'm doing for our fourth row a slightly different shape petal. So this is a bit more of an S curve and it goes longer instead of up. So as before, again, even though it's a different shape, it's the same process. I've chosen a point on the petal and I've drawn through a line and up to the next line. You can see I went round and I marked where my top bit was, so I've now drawn the second half in, and then I realised I hadn't drawn the circle, so it's worth remembering. So where I've started partway down one of those petals, you also need to draw a new circle there as well, so you end on the same point of each petal. So I've gone back in and drawn that, so I now have a marking point to draw this shape all the way around. So same as before, I'm using the first point up into a line to draw the bottom of the curve and then drawing the second part of the curve. So I do it in 2 different bits instead of one line, which it eventually becomes, just because I want to make sure the curves are right. And then I go round and I repeat that all the way around. now I have the basic shape of my mandala, I want to start adding in some extra decorative and embellishment bits. So what I'm doing now is I've made my compass slightly smaller, and inside those two lines we've got for the last round of petals, I've drawn a new line about the same gap below, and I am now copying the same shape that we've just done, but inside of that petal. So it gives what we've just done the same shape outer. So we've got an inner bit we can decorate, and then we've got like an edging on it. And I've drawn a line instead of just doing this because it means, like before, all of our petals will be the same size, as we have the same starting point around the circle on each one as we do every other petal. And then I just follow around and do that on each one of the ones that we've just drawn. So now I've finished tracing that shape round, so I've ended up with an edge to my petal. I'm also going to go round and I'm going to add an extra bit of decoration in as well, in the form of a circle. So we've got lots of lines already for what we've just been using, and I'm using those as a guide here to draw a circle in each petal shape. Now, because we're doing it in pencil, you can gently mark it out, sort of like a guide for yourself to work out your sizes. So don't worry about drawing it in one line, because the pencil's here to work it out, and then later when we go over it in pen is when you can be more definitive and decide exactly where it's going to be. So this is where you're marking it, working it out. You've got pencil so you can rub it out, time to play before we go over in pen and make it permanent. So again, I'm just going around and adding to each one of those spaces the circle as well, so it's not a lot of empty space. Like before, I'm now using the compass again to mark a circle to know where I'm going to be in the petal, and I'm doing this for the second round that we did. So these are the slightly smaller of the petals. So I'm doing this because I'm going to start from those petals, from the point we've just drawn round, and then I'm going to draw following the curve to the edge of the first row petal. So it just adds an edging to each one, and obviously we want to make sure they're all the same. So by having the same start point at the top, by drawing that circle, we know they're all going to be very, very similar. So for these big petals, they're quite a big empty space. We've already got a lot lines in them from where we drew the last round of petals. So I'm just going to use one of those as a guide to draw another petal shape, but this time pointed at both ends into each one of those big petals. So I'm not using anything to mark the width. I'm trusting that I'm going to judge it roughly by looking, but I'm using a guideline at the top of the petal from drawing the last round down to the point of the first row of petals. So as I have my start and finish point set, and then I just repeat that one all the way around. And then for my last little bit of embellishment before we get to adding the pen is I thought that first row of petals looked a little bit plain. So using the lines that we've already got and the curves we've already got, I've just drawn two little curves into the circle middle to add a filling shape inside the petal. So it's a very similar shape to the outside of that petal, but it isn't exactly the same because that first round was a bit of an S curve, whereas this is just a curve from the top to the circle. So now we have our finished pencil mandala. It's time to put it in pen. Now you can choose to leave it in pencil, but I prefer to then go over them in pens. I do different techniques, but for today I'm just going to do it in a solid line. So depending on how confident you are, you can either leave the lines and then try and rub them out later, or you can rub them out and then go over. So what I've done for this video is I've just rubbed out the part that I'm working on instead of rubbing out it all, and I'll rub out that part. I will go over the lines that I can still see, so we're not rubbing them out completely really hard. You still want to be able to see a faint line. If you're less confident, maybe don't rub out quite as hard so they're a little bit more prominent, but as you get used to doing this, the more practice you have, the easier this becomes. And sometimes I will rub out the whole page and then pen the whole page instead of stopping and starting. Just to let anyone know who's going to have a go at trying without rubbing it out, which is perfectly fine, just be aware of the paper quality you're using and the type of pens. I know certainly with this sketchbook you can see me working in now, if I were to try and go over the pencil with the pen and then rub it out later, the paper isn't the best quality, so it soaks up the ink far too well, and then the paper becomes very easy to damage. So just using a rubber on it will destroy the paper and make it awful. It looks awful when it happens, and I unfortunately discovered that the hard way, which is why if I'm using this sketchbook, I will 100% rub out before doing the pen, and you can always go in very carefully and rub out anything that you can see that's left afterwards. So you can see here, I'm not trying to draw full circles to create this flower of life. My hand is not steady enough to draw circles of this size, and unfortunately, as you can see, my compass doesn't have the ability to put a pen in it. So if you have a compass that you're comfortable with, that you can change from pencil to pen, by all means put your pen in a compass and do this like we did before. If not, I just sort of, as you can see, I draw each petal separately. So I'm starting in the middle flower, so I get my curves and then I work my way out and round so I can see the pattern I'm creating. And for the outer curves, you can see I'm drawing those last because I like to be able to draw between 2 points. So I wouldn't want to try and do one of those outer shapes without having the middle one to join it to, just because then it gives me a sense of size as well. And now with these outer circles, the same as these little ones in the middle. If you've got a compass you can put your pen in, definitely do it. If not, you're going to have as steady a hand as you can. And as you can see, I don't try and draw the circle in one go. I start at a point and end at a point, and I work my way around the circle. When doing these, what I do try to see, certainly with the outer one, especially if I'm intending on leaving it as blank negative space, I start on a point where I know there'll be the bottom of a petal, so where the petals meet that line, and then go around to a point where, again, it would meet a petal. I know it's quite tricky to see in this video, but that is what I'm doing. Now that middle bit's complete, I'm going round and rubbing the next bit out. I like to, as you can see, I will brush off where I've just rubbed to clear any of the rubbings that are on top, because I find it's quite tricky to see if you've rubbed enough out or you need to move to the next area when your page is covered in those little rubbings. So I will constantly be rubbing a bit, wiping it out the way so I can have a look, rubbing a bit, and then carrying on until I'm happy. So I've rubbed just enough here to do the next 2 rows of petals, and I will not worry about their embellishments until I have done the whole row. So I'm going to do the whole row of these outers, and I know when we did the pencil we did them in 2 little bits, so we followed the lines, but now we've got our lines underneath as our guide. I am doing it all in one fluid motion because I don't want to end up with extra little marks in my line where we've joined 2 lines together. Now, I don't do it all the time, but I do, certainly I know at the end of this mandala I do it a lot more. I like to start from the point, the outer point, and draw my line in. Now, I know I do both at this point, but I do like to do it that way. This is just because if I start at the point and then work my way back to the main base, I know I'm always starting at the finest point and ending up at the biggest bit. If in pen you start in the middle and work out and you get to your point in the wrong place, it's going to be very obvious if you have to fix it. Whereas if you start at the point and go inwards, odds are that the lines are going to be thicker there anyway, so any mistakes can be covered up. And once I did all my outside petal lines, I've now gone back in and drawn all those little filler lines in the middle too. So my advice is to always do all of one shape before moving to the next. So I'm just removing all the finer outer bits because I realised that I couldn't draw the next round of petals and then rub the next bit out without interfering, so just remove those final hard pencil lines to then be able to do my last, well, that is the last rubbings before I then will finish drawing the mandala. So for the next round of petals, just look for your lines. So here you can see, like I say, I start at the top and I work my way in. And I'm going to go around doing all of those shapes first, and then I will come back and do their embellishments. So I don't necessarily go all the way around the same way when doing these shapes. I'll just do whatever's comfortable. And while I try to not turn my page when I'm on camera, because I want to make it as easy as possible to show you guys what it is I'm doing. If you struggle to draw the same shapes upside down, obviously, because it's going to require your hand to be at a slightly different angle than it was before, by all means turn your page around. There's no reason you can't. I do, if I'm not filming myself, I do find it easier to do these repetitive motions and get a consistent repetitive shape if I move the page around, so my hand is always in the same position instead of trying to move my hand around the page. Same with the embellishments. Turn the page if it makes it easier. Don't think you have to leave it static. And it's just a case now of repeating the same thing we've just done for the last couple of rows for the next ones. So again, I'm starting from that point because it's easier to start from the point and come in, and just drawing each of those shapes. And I'm going to draw all of those petal shapes, and then I will go back and put in the filler decoration that we did. So all those little fillers are in, and we're on to the last round of petals. So this is the only time I changed it up. So I did my outside petal line, and because it is exactly the same shape, I went and did the same filler line at the same time. So if I was drawing a completely different shape, I'd have done all the outside bits first and then the inner bits. Because this is the same shape twice, just one is inside the other, I went ahead and did them at the same time. But as before, you can see I'm starting at the point at the finest part and working my way back to the bulk. If you don't want to do it that way, if you find this way harder, it is about finding your own method. This is what works for me, and this is what helps me keep the finer points at the top. So I don't want a big blob on the end. I want it all to match. So by starting there, I can try and ensure that that is what happens. So with all those shapes now in, I'm going to do the final embellishment set, and those are those circles that we drew in. Now I've got that guide underneath, you can see I'm a lot more confident with drawing that circle in. I'm not sketching it, I'm not worrying about it because I know it's underneath. So now I've got my line to follow, I've got that base, I can just draw it. The only thing with circles is just try and be careful that you join them up neatly, that you don't lap as a bit of a spiral because it becomes very obvious. So with all our lines done, all I'm doing now is I'm just rubbing out any of those extra lines around the edge that we drew at the beginning, because obviously I want the focus to be on the mandala we've just drawn, not or pencil lines. And I will also very, very carefully, if I can still see any pencil lines that I didn't completely rub out before I did the line work in black, I will very carefully go in and remove those as well. Like before, I will keep checking to clear my page because I don't want to think something is a line and rub really hard on it and discover it was just some pencil rubbings or something that I could see that were in my way. But that's it, guys. That is the basics for drawing a mandala. Play with the shapes, play with the sizes, and there are so many possibilities. You can come up with all sorts of really exciting things.